Does that discount the fact that there is something in Antarctica? No, it doesn't. I think we should keep looking. I think we should send people down there and then find out what they find. We were, talking about the Central America, how in the middle of the jungle towards Belize and Honduras, there's nothing there. Well, there is. The biggest temple complex in the whole of the Maya world and pre-Maya world is at El Mirador, and it took until LiDAR was invented for someone to actually go, wait a minute, that is not a mountain, that's actually an actual city. So it's absolutely possible.
The Codega is a guide and a storyteller, escorting you through the night, lighting the way, warding off thieves, ghosts, demons, and other oddities. Along the journey, his companions would often share with him the most curious of stories that he'd record in his Codex. Perhaps you just might find yourself traveling with the Codega and sharing one of yours. In 1938, a covert Nazi expedition set out for Antarctica under the guise of scientific exploration. What they allegedly discovered would challenge everything we know about history. Deep beneath the ice, sonar scans revealed what appeared to be massive artificial structures, pyramids, roads, and even what some claimed were remnants of an ancient civilization. But here's where it gets stranger. Indigenous myths from South America, Polynesia, and even Tibet speak of a time when the world was ruled by advanced beings, before a cataclysm reshaped the earth. These beings, often described as giants or hybrid gods, possess knowledge far beyond what mainstream academia acknowledges. Could these frozen ruins be the remnants of pre-flood civilization wiped out by a global catastrophe? And if so, what were they trying to warn us about? Welcome back, seekers of hidden knowledge. This is Codega's Codex of Curiosities, and I'm your guide, Rai the Codega. Today, we're going to unravel the mysteries of the past, stories of lost civilizations, great floods that reshaped humanity, and the advanced knowledge of ancient cultures that defy modern understanding. Joining us today is one of the world's leading researchers into forbidden history, sacred sites, and pre-flood civilizations. His work spans continents and centuries, digging deep into the truths that mainstream academia refuses to acknowledge. He has explored ancient temples, studied the legends of lost civilizations, and uncovered evidence that suggests humanity's history is far older and far more complex than we've been led to believe. From pre-flood cities buried beneath Antarctica's ice to the presence of giants in our ancient past, we'll be discussing the knowledge these cultures left behind, the potential collapse of our own modern civilization, and maybe what this all means for us in the future. So everyone, please welcome Freddy Silva to Codega's Codex of Curiosity. Freddy, thank you for joining us here today.
Oh, my pleasure. And thanks for bringing a bit of warmth and sunshine into very dismal Northeast America.
Yeah, it's the least I can do. It's the least I can do. Yeah, and you were saying earlier that you had just visited us here in the nice Yucatan Peninsula. So I'm glad you came here and had a piece of the warmth and the sun before heading back to Maine, where it is cold and dreary at this time.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to the Yucatan many, many times. I always tell people it's not really Mexico. In fact, if you want to understand Central America, you got to go to the Yucatan. And in fact, I was surprised to find that, and I can't tell you the exact location for security reasons, not because of some conspiracy. I was amazed to find that during our exploration of ancient civilizations there was one particular temple which hardly anyone goes to, and it's very out of the way. There was the caretaker says, well, when you come back, when it's quiet and no one's watching, I'll take you down into the underground and show you the 8-foot giants covered with red hair. And I didn't even volunteer the information. And that's exactly how the ancients always described them, being very tall, blonde or red-headed. So they're still there in this little place, not too far, like an hour from Chichen Itza. That's all I'm going to tell you.
That is now my interest has peaked. Now I got to start searching for this, but who knows? Maybe I'll find it. Maybe I won't. And that's the way it is. It's always a mystery in trying to find these things because, them being overrun, these sites being overrun for just the tourists to snap a picture kind of ruins everything, for those of us who really want to explore and dive deep into the history and the mystery of these sites. it kind of gets all trampled on, and it becomes this commercial, I don't know, carnival of sorts.
Yeah, I mean, we've been there before, though. I mean, it's in the Victorian era, it was fashionable for gentlemen to woo women in Britain by taking them to dig up giants' graves. And the incredible thing is that there's all these great stories that whenever they dismantled an ancient sacred place of veneration, the weather would turn on them, and a lot of them got struck by lightning. And this happens not just in Britain, in France, in the Iberian Peninsula, all around the world. It's as though the sites are well protected by the spirit of place. So it's kind of a bit of a humor about it. But at the same time, yeah, the stuff that I write about and my peers write about is bringing more attention to these ancient places. But at the same time, the other edge of the sword is that you're also attracting people who go there just for, very sort of frolicky interests, and it's mostly about them. It's usually the selfie. You're the main item, and then there's a background, which is the temple, which is completely opposite way around. But we live in a narcissistic culture. But at least more people are beginning to sort of tap into the fact that the history that we've been told doesn't hold up the scrutiny. There's something much older underneath all the buildings that we take for granted.
I couldn't agree more with you. Yeah, it's usually the selfie where it's like, look at me, I'm holding the pyramid. Okay, good, next,
Yeah,
and all
it's
this
in
other
this
thing.
thing.
Yep, yeah,
Oh, that
exactly.
hasn't been done before.
Yeah, or it's like, I got the nose of the Sphinx. Yeah, it's like, okay,
Yeah, I'm
let's.
still looking for an original take on all of that. I haven't found one yet.
No, I agree, and but like you said though, it is kind of opening that doorway, and hopefully there is a small percentage that are starting to question, like how did they build this, like
Yeah.
we're told that they use copper tools or stones to make these perfect cuts, and there's no possible way, our technology has declined. We've lost the ability, we've lost that ability to possibly cut stones the way that they used to. I know in Peru there's walls where they have like the ancient wall, and then they build on it, and then they build on it, and it just gets worse and worse.
Yes, exactly.
Technology is not supposed to work like that. So we lost our way, we lost our wisdom, we lost and the our techniques, and then we started to gain them back, but in a different. I feel that we're finally starting to get back the technology that maybe we had, but in a different route, more of a technological side. Whereas before, I think there's things that we've lost completely, that we don't have a grasp. Almost a marriage of science and magic together might be the best way to answer that.
Yeah, and if you ask the locals and the ancestors and the people who were there closer to the events, much better than any European academic. I mean, let's face it, if you go to South America, the people that lived there their ancestors were closer to the events. So let's start there. And the thing that I find whenever I ask people locally, they'll say, well, my grandfather said this and he heard it from his grandfather, and it's maintaining the tradition. So if you take it back far enough, and this is why it takes so long to write books and do stuff. It's just the research is very cumbersome. It turns out that you have to understand what the God meant in the old days. It's not like some Christian concept of Yahweh, where there's some bearded guy sitting in the sky on a throne dishing out always bad news. There's never good news when a Christian God talks to you. But from their point of view, that's not the case. Even in the Pacific, in Polynesia, I heard about the fact that there was another culture that lived alongside human hunter-gatherers, for lack of a better term, 12,000 years ago. And they were called human-like, but not quite human. And it turns out that we were very comfortable with these people, so they must have looked like us. They were just much taller. Now, the Egyptians have given us a very good clue as to how tall they were. It's written on the Temple of the Temple of Karnak, beg your pardon. So it's 5 cubits, and if you use the royal cubit, that's about 8 feet tall. That's about the length of the bones that we find in giants' graves in France and in Britain as well, and also in other parts of the world. So that's consistent in terms of height. And the other stories is that they were a light skin, not white. They were described as light skin. They were blonde with blue eyes or red haired with green eyes. This is long before Caucasians were invented, by the way. We're talking about a long distant part of nature. But the thing is, the one thing that connected them all is that they had complete control over the laws of nature. That's the quote I hear all the time. In other words, they would look at nature, they'd understand it, they get into the nitty gritty how things work, And that's how you become a god, because a god is the spirit that's found in anything. So a lamp has a god, a piece of grass has a god, air has a god, water has a god. So if you and I want to understand how water works in all of its myriads, from frozen all the way to vapor, you understand the intricacies of how to change water from one element into another, you become a god. That's what it meant. Now, that once you understand that, things fall into place, because if you understand the laws of nature, you can manipulate nature in a certain way within the rules and get things to do what we don't know how to do. So, for example, there's a story of two Jesuit priests that were walking the so-called Inca Trail, which the Inca inherited from somebody else, by the way. And they went to a grave and they desecrated the grave, and they found two beautiful jars, which they took, and they said, well, we can make some money in the local market. Now, one of the priests drops one of the jars. This horrible, pungent liquid came out, and they went, oh, that can't be good for you. So they took the remaining jar and they sold it at the market. Now, they came back the other way 2 weeks later, and they found the exact place where the vase had dropped on the bedrock, and the liquid had actually melted the bedrock in that spot. In India, they have exactly the same story about a certain molecular acid that's found in plants that you can mix with, I believe it's with quicklime and another ingredient, which unfortunately they didn't give us the full instructions for the recipe. We're missing one ingredient. But apparently in India, they said up until the historic era, you could massage these natural ingredients, put them over a rock, and it would destabilize the stone just long enough for a stonemason to go chock, 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 and create those beautiful shapes that we see today. So that was one way in which they did it, to manipulate the laws of nature to get to do things with megaliths that we certainly did not know how to do. And South America, as you said, is a great example. I mean, you got the biggest stones, the biggest masonry at the bottom, and it gets to the top with the Inca and the Spanish stuff, which always falls apart, and it's full of mortar as well. And it falls apart every 15 years when an earthquake comes along. So civilization is going opposite to what it's supposed to be going. We're supposed to be starting with pebbles and ending up with megaliths, but yet we start with megaliths, we end up with brick, which falls apart. So something is very, very wrong in our understanding of the past.
That I now I find it absolutely fascinating, and that people don't like really take this to heart and realize, like, yeah, we've lost this technology. It can't. We're never increasing in our abilities. We decrease now. What is the reason why? And I believe you kind of know, but what was the reason as to this decline? What happened?
Well, things go in phases, don't they? Again, the Vedas have a very, very good way of describing the worlds, which last several thousands of years before they fall apart. Usually because of an outside agency like solar flares, which burns the Earth to a crisp, as it tends to do very occasionally. I mean, only a big one in Canada in 1890, which I believe was the Carrington event. It actually electrified telegraph users to their stations, because so much energy came out of the sun, it knocked out all the electricity down the eastern seaboard. That was only over 100 years ago, and it happens very regularly. Then there's flooding, of course. Major meteorites hit the Earth and causes the oceans to splash like a bathtub, and of course it wipes out everything. So there's a constant cleansing of civilizations, and the Egyptians also left us a wonderful story when they were telling a young man from Greece who happened to show up to ask the Egyptians, hey, we want to start a civilization, and you've done it really, really well, and you're now going downhill. So how about helping us out? And this priest said, oh, you Greeks, you're too young. Wait till you've been around as long as we have. We have witnessed the sun set where it now rises and rises where it now sets 4 times. We've experienced the Earth going upside down, not just a magnetic pole shift. The actual Earth was hit with something so big that it caused the poles to literally go upside down. And the Hopi have the same story, by the way, so they can't be making it up. And they said that basically these things happen very periodically, and that's why we're obsessed with the sky. This is why we have long-range calendars to let you know what the Earth is doing in space relative to other bodies, because once in a while, something appears from outside the solar system, and it bypasses Jupiter, which is our big gatekeeper. And if you were in 1997 watching the Shoemaker-Levy comet splash into Jupiter, you'll know. But once in a while, the gatekeeper is on the other side of the solar system, and big chunks hit the Earth, and boom, we get obliterated. So the point was that there have been many, countless civilizations on the planet. Many of them have been very technological in terms of their understanding of the laws of nature, kind of like we have computers today. Well, they had their own method of doing things back then. We can't compare them by our own methods. But once in a while, things just go upside down. So we have to start like children and cavemen again. And the idea was that if you can prognosticate what's happening in the sky, you can hide before these events happen. So in many parts of the world, we see ancient underground civilizations, like in Turkey, in East Island, in New Zealand as well, that they know what's coming out of the sky and they hide in caves. They'll be there for like 3-4 weeks, maybe a couple of months. They come back out. Part of their land has been destroyed, but at least they survived and they continue. And that was the whole point, that these things happen very regularly and the universe is not that stable at all, and neither is the Earth. So the idea is to maintain your position in space, look at what's happening in the sky, and then you live to tell the tale for another day. So this idea of ancient civilizations to the native peoples of the world is no big idea. For them, it's just a matter of fact.
Super interesting, yeah, and I've heard that before too, where the world has flipped upside down, and it's something so dramatic, and also yeah, that they've witnessed the sun change its location 4 times. So
Mm.
that's telling you that the world has changed its rotation. It's rotating a different direction. Something cataclysmic beyond what we can even imagine has happened,
Yeah.
and
And
yeah,
it's usually a comet that hits the Earth at the wrong angle at the wrong moment. I mean, if you can actually hit the Earth in a specific location relative to the Earth's rotation and gravitational field, and again, it's either by design or pure luck, usually it's pure luck, then you will create a counterpoint and the Earth starts rotating backwards. And the Egyptians also said at some points the Earth actually rotates backwards. The Chinese actually said this in 2500 BC, which had to lead to a recalibration of calendars by several days because nothing was growing in the seasons where it was supposed to be. And they said that there was a moment where the moon sat on the horizon for 3 days and it didn't move. It was pure night. On the other side of the world, in Mexico, they said the sun didn't rise for 3 days. It was daylight for 3 days. The Earth literally went backwards and stood still for 3 days, and it went, whoop, let's start again. So again, we live in a very volatile planet, which succumbs to all kinds of problems very periodically.
of course, yeah, and we're talking about the Yucatan Peninsula. There's Chicxulub, where the meteor that wiped out, it was supposed to be the dinosaur killer, that landed in that location. And which was really interesting. I have a backstory to that, but that's for another day. Now, okay, so these giants, these ones that looked like us, these 8-foot beings, red hair, pale skin, blonde hair as well. What happened to these beings? Where did they come from? What is your theory on where they come from? Would that possibly be Adel, or where is your thoughts on that one?
Oh, it's not even my theory. It's the words of the ancestors. So one of the things that I like doing is go around the world collecting stories from very ancient people. And once you start adding them up and learning dead languages, which is one of my special things, language that nobody speaks anymore, but a few like 2 8-year-old people still understand, you start understanding how things are put together and how everything overlaps. And what was interesting was that they said that by the time the flood came 11,000 years ago, again, meteorite hits the Earth, makes all the glaciers go away, and suddenly you have a massive rise in sea level. Well, that parallel civilization used to live on, from my research, 7, possibly 8 different islands or places that behaved like islands. Mostly now underwater, except for the one in Lake Titicaca, which is the city of Tiwanaku, which is over 17,000 years old, by the way. And another one's up in Armenia, which I'm actually looking at right now. And they said that by the time this event happened, that civilization was already on the wane. And we were now coming up this way. And the one thing that happened was that after the flood, the gods also died, but also a lot of humans died as well. Maybe as much as 90% of the population of the planet drowned or died in some way or just starved to death. So what happened was, because the gods didn't really want to hang out with human beings, and I don't blame them sometimes watching the world, but their point was because we're much more advanced in certain ways, we don't want to prejudice the direction in which humans are going. They have to follow their own path. But once in a while, they would come over to the mainland to teach people how to make bread or how to get milk out of a cow, so that they could stop behaving like cave dwellers and living naked and dragging women into their caves and stuff like that. So they would suggest a few things, and then they'd go off back into the shadows, disappear. And this happens in every culture around the world. So what happened was they had a problem at the end, because from the surviving text, they said, some of us will have to stay behind to help the human survivors pick up the pieces, because no one's going to survive this cataclysm. So people actually volunteered to stay behind and help the hunter-gatherers learn about civilization. And lo and behold, about 9,000 BC, all around the world, in specific locations which have stories of gods arriving from the ocean, we have the discovery of, excuse me, animal husbandry, the agriculture, astronomy, mathematics, and so forth. The foundations of civilization. That's not an accident. That's a story that happens all around the world. So if these people did not communicate with each other, how do they have exactly the same stories at the same time? It must be some self-supporting evidence. So if you fast forward about 1,000 years, then the gods would take over the actual leadership of the people. And from everything that I've heard around the world, there is not one case where they considered themselves to be superior than humans. There was a mutual respect between both civilizations. There was no sense of superiority. That's what I love about this story. Everybody was on the same equal footing, even though one had tens of thousands of years of development over the other. So they would take on the stewardship of the land until they could find a suitable human to take over the throne of the local territory. And then they'd disappear back into the shadows, and they'd observe. And then, once the corruption set in, as it tends to do among the human race, they'd kick that person off the throne, they'd take over the throne, and they get another responsible human to take over, and then they go back into the shadows. So they were definitely very much kind of like a guardian society of us. They were very concerned with our own development, but still they would leave it up to us. But after a while, and this now comes from the Egyptian tradition, they also were running out of people with whom to interbreed, because the special qualities of the gods was in their blood itself. And by intermarrying with humans, they would basically, I think pollute is the wrong word, they would diffuse the blood, and it would remove their special ability. And so, but they had no choice. So this is where you get the intermarrying. And the Egyptians call it the bloodline of the half human that was half divine. And then there's this incredible phrase in one of the papyri, I think it's in St. Petersburg right now. It talks about the time when the first pharaoh of a purely human bloodline takes over the throne of Egypt in 3100 BC, and that was the pharaoh Mena. You may have said his hotel opposite the pyramids, by the way, Mena House. It turns out it's actually an Armenian name. It means the first ruler. So there's a lot of intermarriage between Armenia and Egypt at the time. So basically, that's what happened to the gods. They intermarried, and this is why you find in Polynesia and even today in New Zealand, which has a people called the Waitaha, who hardly anyone's ever heard of. They were on Easter Island before the flood, and they used to work with the gods, and they talk about the interaction with them. They talk about the time when Easter Island was an archipelago, not one island. It was several islands back then, which is absolutely right. And they intermarried after the flood, which is why in my lectures in New Zealand, you see these Maori people who are light skinned and they're blonde and they're blue eyed. It's incredible to watch. And I actually pointed them out. I said, so how does it feel to be having intermarried with the gods? I said, well, we're very proud of that. But it's too bad that the height didn't sort of endure, because obviously as the interbreeding kept going, the height difference evened out. So they're pretty much average size now, but it's still there to this very day.
That is fascinating. Yeah, I lived in New Zealand for a year, and I have some good Maori friends,
Oh,
and I did. There was some people who called themselves Maori, but they don't look it at all, and they stuck out, and it was very interesting. And now I know. Now I know. That's
In fact, there's another tribe there called the Ngati Hotu, who don't get any attention whatsoever. There's been a lot of people in New Zealand way before the Maori, and the Maori know this. If you know your Maori history, it does say that when they arrived, there was people already there, and there's archaeological evidence going back to at least 6,000 BC. But that's another story. And they basically were saying that they're very much blonde, even redheaded, and green-eyed. And there was a grandmother there whose work I published in my book, The Missing Lands, who got fed up with the academics up in Auckland saying, "Oh, the Maori are the first people in 1200 BC," to which most people just laugh at. It's just not possible. And they said, "I'm going to do my DNA through National Geographic, of all people, a very conservative institution." And it turns out that the DNA results match the oral tradition, that they originally came from Sumeria and Egypt about 5,500 years ago, traveled down Madagascar, went to Yucatan, where they helped to rebuild some temples. Then they went down the Cordillera, down to Peru, to a place called Puno, which is a town that still exists on Lake Titicaca, helped do some work down there. And then they went to Easter Island and then to New Zealand from there. And it matches the DNA results, absolutely. And why would they make it up? I mean, they have nothing to gain from lying. So I, for one, believe that their story is absolutely correct.
wow. It those types of oral traditions and those stories really give credence to things, and we really got to start taking more account of them, because I like what you're doing, and you're listening to the people who were directly descendants of these, and that is how we passed our stories. We didn't
Exactly.
we used to pass our stories through verbal. It was all oral tradition is what it was, and
Yeah.
then we started writing these down, and I feel that when we started writing things down, that's when perhaps maybe things were perverted of sorts. Like we're taken astray, and we're gonna change things. And if we just follow this writing, all I have to do is change this, and through
Yeah.
one generation, I have now instituted my new story, because the previous generation doesn't, they're going to remember, but once they're gone, it's this new generation, and all they're going to do is read these books and believe these books, and they're not going to believe the oral traditions that used to be passed down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like, and that's the problem. It's that the oral tradition, I mean, the Druids were very good at this. They spent 10 years learning the tradition before the head Druid was made into a head Druid. You have to remember this. You just have to keep the guy or the woman alive to make sure that they don't die, because otherwise, before they passed it on, it disappears. So they placed a great importance on this. But I mean, writing was very interesting. In fact, I remember a story that lives in the Egyptian tradition of the god of wisdom, Jehuti, or Thoth, as the Greeks ended up calling him. And there was a title. There was many, many Jehutis, by the way. There were many Osirises as well. There was dozens of them. There was a title, which few people understand. And there was one story that Jehuti goes into front of Ptah, who's the architect of the gods, and says, "Listen, I've come up with a great idea. How about I teach humans how to write?" And he looks over his wife and says, well, that's fantastic. I mean, not only are you the god of mathematics and sacred buildings and the sky, but now you've invented a way for humans also to communicate. But beware, Jehuti, because words can be misleading. They can be subverted. They can be to mean the opposite of what they actually mean. We use sound. Sound is referencing. That's why we don't use vowels. Even the words that we iterate have a certain sonic quality, and that is where the truth is. So I can just imagine being in the room with the God of Wisdom going, "Okay, I'll take that on board and I'll still invent writing." But it's absolutely true. I mean, you go through Egypt and you look at the statues and the temples, and academics will say, Ramesses II built this temple. Maybe or maybe not. He added his name to the temple. Doesn't mean he built it. In fact, at the Temple of Edfu, I mean, his name is everywhere, and his name is also in many monuments in Egypt. But just because you put your name on there doesn't mean you built it. It's a bit like saying King Charles owns all the buildings in Britain. Well, right now he does because he's the king. But the next person, his son, that will inherit the throne, will then become the owner of those buildings. But he didn't build anything. And the Egyptians had a very long tradition of people inheriting other people's works by going along, taking the sandstone, sanding it down, and going chock, 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 and changing the story. In fact, when you go to Egypt, and if you look at the very beautiful bas reliefs on the Temple of Hatshepsut, where the actual hieroglyphs are sticking out, that's the high point of the culture. If you go down the road to a temple of Medinet Habu, which not many people go to, unfortunately, you'll see the hieroglyphs that are carved this deep into the stone to the point where the stone is actually falling apart. It's like someone took a Dremel on every single generation and kept hammering and rehammering the story into the wall. And it looks horrible. I mean, it's like my grandmother could have done better, with a pickaxe. But it's quite laughable, but it's quite true. And today, of course, we have journalism, investigative journalism, and now we have social media and certain people who I won't mention, where it's full of propaganda, and you just change the words in the story, and people believe this nonsense, and we end up with a political situation that we're in right now in many countries around the world. So it's very dangerous. Words are very unpredictable. So you have to go back to symbolism, sound, and sacred geometry to understand what things mean, or even better, go to the temples and feel the place, because truth has a ring to it. And when you feel good, you know there's something true about the place that you're in.
I like that. I like that a lot. Feeling the truth instead of, and I agree with you, like this propaganda and all these words, they're twisted. People twist them, and they manipulate them to gain a reaction from people, to gain a outcry or something along that line.
Yeah.
I was just, and I was just looking at something earlier on Facebook, and I saw this post, and I'm like, this is strictly geared to create like
Clickbait.
yes, that's exactly what it was, and it was for people to comment and to be upset and outraged, and
Exactly.
and even myself, I was like, no, that's what they're trying to do. This has no point other than to try to get people to comment and just to build their build their comments and build their likes and just to build this. And I'm like, that is completely wrong. You're manipulating the masses with your words and your photos, and what you're doing is wrong. We
Mm,
need to get back and unify. And
exactly. We're in a very, very dangerous situation right now. The first time in history where we have given our God given right and our abilities to these little black rectangles called cell phones, and we are just too lazy to do and dig up any valuable information. And I watch people being totally giving up their sovereignty to these pathetic little things, which you should only be using for making phone calls, for heaven's sake, or taking a picture if you have a very good iPhone. But at the same time, I see the manipulation going on. But if the electricity cuts out, where are you going to be? I remember when a hurricane came through New Jersey about a decade ago, and I was watching people in the streets of New York not knowing where to buy bread or where to get water. The 7-Eleven is just around the corner, but they could not remember the location because they recorded everything on their cell phone. So they have no wherewithal. We have a big Achilles heel going on right now, and it's really, really dangerous. And of course, AI gets even worse. I can't tell you how many emails I get, and I totally ignore because I've got better things on my mind to do, where they're saying, what do you think of these pictures and photographs of the Nephilim and the Anunnaki? I said, has it not occurred to you that the camera was only invented in the 19th century, and we're talking about things that happened 12,000 years ago? Where is the logic here? And you just give up after that because it really is quite. It becomes comical, actually.
extremely, like I that is one of my pet peeves is people not having deductive reasoning to realize that this is a fake photo, and it they made it in sepia, so it looks like it's aged, but it's so crisp and clear and it's perfect. And I'm like, come on, people,
It's very good.
it's getting better. Like,
Yeah,
there
I mean,
was a
as a
time.
photographer, I can tell the difference because I have a trained eye in photography, so I can pretty much tell. But it's for the ordinary person very, very difficult. And this is why I take people on tours to sacred places around the world, is to sort of get them to stop. And the first thing I tell people is, unless you've got a dying parent or a business that you have to run, switch your cell phone off. Don't go on social media. If you have to check email, do it. Otherwise, don't. Be here. You've paid money to come here. I want you to spend 10 days. And I try to design my tour so we try to avoid tourists as much as possible, which means doing a bit of spaghetti driving, as I call it. But it makes a lot of sense. Sometimes we end up with the temple to ourselves. And the point is to listen to the sacred place. What is it trying to tell you? And I'll point out things that merit attention, paint a certain story, and then I'll leave you to it. And I watch people over the course of 10 days going from this discombobulated mass of flesh, totally anxious, totally paranoid about the world. And in 10 days later, they don't want to go home. They realize that they're in control. It took just 10 days to take control, and they could hear nature. They could understand. They could have great dreams. Some of them came up with these prophetic ideas, which actually I added to my research, which is incredible. So it's how quickly you can actually connect with the spirit of the land and take control over this. And when they get back to the airport, it's like this jarring noise. There's a very low signal to noise ratio nowadays. And they realize how quickly you can learn to compartmentalize yourself from all of this. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to go away and hide like a monk. I mean, I think that would be defeating the purpose of incarnating. I think if you're here on this planet, make the best use of it now. Drive a good car, eat sushi, go and smell flowers, make honey, whatever. The thing is, you have to integrate yourself into the world, but learn to be in control and compartmentalize what you allow in, which is going to do you some good and raise you as a spiritual being, and leave the rest out to people who have a better handle on what's going on. You can't solve all the world's problems. You can send good thoughts to people who can do and will send and are in a position to change things. But if you have no direct control over the event, there's nothing you can do. So you might as well not worry about it. You have to get on with your own life. And believe me, this basic advice has people changing their entire career. So I've seen corporate lawyers suddenly give up their, $500,000 worth of money a year. And they'll email me 6 months later and said, I'm now helping stuff for pro bono and all of these charities. I get paid 50 grand a year, and I'm so happy, and I'm so glad I went on this tour. And that's how it happens. So it is possible. We have to be in charge and recognize that. Excuse me, we're the gods we're actually waiting for. The help is not going to come from there. It's there. It helps you. It comes to you in dream states or books that come out of a shelf or in synchronicities. That's how the gods work. And they are around, by the way. They've never left. They're actually quite around, in not always in physical form, I should say. But I mean, we have to take control. We have to be the gods we're waiting for, and that's how things change for the better.
That is, you took the words out of my mouth. Something I've always said is, we are the ones we've been waiting for, and
Yeah,
because
the Hopi
everybody's
came up with that story, by the way.
uh,
I'm just plagiarizing the Hopi.
perfect. That I guess I am too, because we're always sitting there waiting for someone else to save us. We're always like, well, you do it. Well, I'm going to sit on my couch and not do anything because I'm waiting for the savior to come and save me. But it's like, no, that's you. You are the one that needs to get out there. And just to step back here a little bit, you were talking about the cell phones. I've often said that I'm like I believe technology is making us dumber. We have the power of of the unlimited knowledge right in our hand, but in fact we're becoming dumber. And it was like you said, with they didn't know where 7-Eleven was, and that's what I said. I said GPS is making us dumber, because I used to remember how to get here, how many turns to do. Now I just put on my GPS and it's like, go here, go here. Or before,
Automation is the worst thing.
yes,
I mean, think about it. It's not really the fault of the cell phone or the companies that make this stuff. It's the way people use the tool. So if I have a hammer, which is designed to put a nail into a wall so I can hang a picture, yeah, that's useful. But I can also go out and bludgeon someone with it. That's the wrong way to do something. So everything has a right and the wrong, a light and the dark side. So the cell phone is very useful if you're in trouble. And I mean, I make so few phone calls. I still had a landline until a year ago. And people used to send me texts on my landline and figure that one out. So I gave up. I have to get rid of the landline because people were unfriending me. Not because of my fault, but sometimes I'll take a photograph with it because my camera, the batteries run out or something. But apart from that, no, I still have to write things down. And people said, well, so how quickly did you write a book? I said, well, I don't know. It depends how long it takes to get the research and then for me to transcribe all my notes onto a computer. What you actually write things down. Yeah, it's called paper and a pencil, and I still use it. And because my thoughts run much clearer that way, I'm in control of the actual process. You can think much clearer, and it means that you also can also see connections that you can't usually do when your synapses are working, looking at a computer. And it's actually, and I joked about this years ago, and they actually did a survey on this, that when you're scanning things on a computer screen, because of the refresh rate and the way that your iris works with the refresh rate on your screen, you only retain less than 30% of the information. So if we have a lack with concentration, it's because of that. Our brains just aren't keeping up with what's on the screen. You think you are, but your brain's not retaining anything. So again, if you go back to the old ways where, they could maintain a civilization in balance for 4,000 years, just like that. Today, we can't even keep anything going for more than 10 years, even less now. I mean, we're splitting, political parties like a big wash spin cycle so quickly that you can't get traction in the political system at all. One undermines the other, and then we change it back 4 years later. So obviously something's not quite right.
I agree totally. Yes. And I agree. It's just this divisiveness, this division that's continuously happening. Now, something caught my attention that I did jump over your previous, when we were talking there, was the gods are still among us.
Mm-hmm. Oh, they're all around.
Please tell me, let's go into that a little bit.
They
So
tend to be the more sort of enlightened people among society. And I heard this before. I work with a channeling group in England. And just in case people are cynical about channeling, the person that I work with is a natural channeler. She works with the police in Britain, and she has a near 100% record solving serious crime. So, and we've predicted stuff that I can't even tell you about for certain reasons. And they do. And it's about validation to make sure that we understand the source or where we're getting the information from can be verified. So if something happens of a big nature here on the planet, we have that information 48 hours before that. We just can't tell anybody because then the police will think that we're actually part of that. We're involved in that particular process, which of course we're not. But what was said was that the once in a while, when the Earth is going through big changes, as we are right now, with climate change, it's undeniable. I mean, just go to northern Scotland to find out what climate change is doing up there, and you'll understand it pretty quickly. Um, the the invisible universe, or the gods, or any whatever you want to call these people, they will suddenly manifest on the face of the earth in order to integrate themselves into society, in order to move things along. So there'll be politicians or healers or statesmen or writers or television people. They'll blend, but usually there's something unusual about them. There's a demeanor which actually instantly sort of defines them as someone that has a sort of a presence, an inner glow. And you could point out to people like Robin Williams, for example. I mean, Robin Williams did not come from this planet. I'm sorry. He came here to entertain and make our lives so much better while he was having a terrible time. And the point is, most of these people are so enlightened that when they physicalize on the planet Earth, they have a terrible time. I mean, they usually end up committing suicide. A lot of jazz musicians are like that. And I point to the fact that at the end of the Second World War, so many of the famous people that we find today as writers and musicians and entertainers were born at the end of the Second World War, so that when they became, teenagers and young people, they were giving us a new way of looking at the world. So that's where we get the flower power from, the hippie movement, a very happy time on the planet for at least 20 years. So these people appear all the time. And in the old days, the Greeks were saying exactly the same thing, that they're unusual people. Sometimes they're much taller. They have, again, an unusual physical features about them, like they don't really belong in that particular culture. And one of them was described as Amenhotep. Sorry, not Amenhotep, Imhotep, beg your pardon, the architect of the gods who helped to build part of the complex of Saqqara. And he was renowned as being a god in this particular form. And it's been said that he was also incarnated to help move things along. And if you look at the political situation at the time in Egypt, it was a time of great change and a great catastrophe. So he was fundamental in restructuring society in a way that it became coherent for another 1,000 years. So people like that. People like Leonardo da Vinci or Isaac Newton. Gandhi, I believe, was one of them. And Mother Teresa, I definitely believe, was one of them. She was so humble that she dies on the same day as Princess Diana, and no one knew about it. That's incredible. That's the sign of a very enlightened person. It's not about them, it's about what they do. So these people are around, and when they're not in physical form, they tend to manifest in the most weird places, like sacred sites. There are some places that I gravitate to for my work. People tend to think that my work begins in a library. It doesn't. I actually sit on a mound somewhere or near some standing stones, and I just go, this is interesting. So what's this about? And before you know it, it's like some invisible force is coming to my head and it's showing me images and words and suggestions. And I'm writing this down. I'm thinking, well, this would be fantastic if you could prove it. And of course, for the next year, I'm researching this stuff, and books come out of library shelves, or people will email me with a suggestion, which is exactly what I was looking for an answer. And that's how the process works. So I know that it works for me and many other people that I work with, because we are surrounded by people that are helping to support my work, and I give them credit for it. I'm not doing this by myself. The information comes from other sources too, but I have to look at the science. I have to look at the history, the academic background, because I don't want people to think that this is coming just out of my head. I want to give it a good solid foundation, and then I take that somewhere else. That's why it takes a while to put a good book together. So the help is there, and many ancient cultures talk about this as well. That when you can't relax and you can't sit down quiet and listen to the spirit of the place, then do a little bit of San Pedro, a bit of ayahuasca, meditate, do some Kriya yoga, whatever it takes, whatever tool it takes to get you to connect with the other world and all the beings that live there, because that's what the information is. And I'll quote Plato and Pythagoras here when they said, and I quote, "There's only one place where you will find the truth and real knowledge, not here on the place of the earth." Because this is all opinions and impressions. The only place where you'll find the truth and pure knowledge is in the other world. And what they did was they spent 3 years of their lives going into mysteries teachings and secret schools in order to end up having an induced near-death experience where they traveled to the other world for 3 days, came back into the body, and they went, that's how it works. And then they put the information into the popular arena, sometimes dressed up as fiction, like Star Wars is a great story, but that information comes from somewhere else. That's why it's so popular. So you see, the help is there, but you have to ask for it. It's not going to arrive on your doorstep, because one of the rules that the invisible world said was, we're here to help you because we know how difficult it is to be in the physical body, but we can't do it unless you ask us. That contravenes the first rule of the universe, which is the law of non-intervention. If you're a Star Trek fan, you'll know this as the Prime Directive. That's where Gene Roddenberry got that idea from, and I mean that literally. So you have to ask us for help. So you can pray, you can sit there and meditate and say, well, I need some help with this particular work. Where should I go? And let it go. Don't accept any immediate sort of wow. If you get a big vision all of a sudden, then you're very lucky. Usually it comes when you're not thinking about it. Suddenly you're cooking chicken and you go, well, that's interesting. Boom. So that's how they got the information down into your system, and then you go off and write about it or produce a documentary. So the help is there. We just have to listen and be part of the process.
I this keeps coming up as well in my previous interviews, is that we're giving these signs, we're giving these messages, or as one of my previous guests said, is omens. These omens are there for us, and we just we have to see them. And I've told the story numerous times, but I was asking for a question. I needed a sign on something, and it's always, the thing's always there. And I that day I remember I was like, I need a sign. And I looked up on top of this building, and on top of this building was this huge billboard, and it said, "If you're looking for a sign, this is it." I'm like, okay, well that is it then. That means I'm going down that path, because it's so blatantly obvious, but so many times, like we said earlier, people are stuck on their cell phones, and they're unable to see or hear or listen to the signs that are being given to us, that we're asking for, but we're too we're too busy, we're too often in a different other place, that we're unable to see those signs. The messages are always there, the omens are always there.
That's
Yeah.
one of the things why they built these ancient monuments, and usually with big rocks. And I always ask myself, why did they just use small rocks which are manageable? Well, A, because they were taller, and because if you use bigger rocks, it's all relative. But at the same time, it means that these things aren't going to go away, not by war, not by earthquakes, not by meteorites, unless the meteorite lands on the actual building. They meant these things to last. And once I just figured out how they work, and there is a mechanical device that goes on between all the temples on the planet, where they're placed, the type of rock that they use, the manipulation of the local gravity field, and so forth. It's all there. It's all validatable. Is the fact that it was there to remind you, or when you forget, to connect with the bigger scheme of things, not just with everybody on the planet, but also with yourself and the other world. The rules within the temples themselves create an environment that allows you to cross barriers, and especially physical barriers. And under the right conditions, you discover your connection to the bigger scheme of things. So when you walk out of the building, you are whole. That's why we call them holy places. That's where the term comes from. You are whole. So this is the idea. When you can't do it by yourself, they design what I call these self-help centers around the planet. So you go, well, I'm not feeling too good today. I'm going to go into this beautiful temple, and I'm going to connect with the place called the altar, which is where you are altered. And I walk in through the entrance, which is the entrance. You see, the language is right there if you just observe. So you go to the most holiest part of the temple, which is where the electromagnetic influence happens to be, which then, because you're an electromagnetic being, starts to influence you. So if you're in the right state of mind to sit there and meditate and be away with the fairies for a little bit, that's where you get the really good information. And I've never seen any person, even when they're doing selfies, walk out of a temple in an angry mood. Because a temple reminds you of the perfection of nature, and that's why we like these places. An Egyptian temple is just pretty. It is perfect. Why? Because they looked at nature and looked at the perfection of nature and then did all the measurements of the sacred geometry and went, oh, we can build that into a human-shaped temple. It doesn't look like a flower, but it has the same proportions as a flower. And that's why it looks perfect. It's the same with Stonehenge. It's perfect because it's derived from the laws of nature. So by implication, if you walk into a perfect environment, you feel better. You feel perfect. You feel connected to the building and the landscape. It's a bit like driving a car. If you buy a really sort of badly designed car, it's like, well, it just gets me from A to B. But if you go into a beautifully designed car, like an Alfa Romeo, for example, you know there's something about the car. Okay, it's not just the price tag. It's the something about the ergonomics of the car that makes you feel good. It makes you feel at one with the machine. And that's why it works. It's the same with anything. It could be a desk. It could be a computer. It can be anything. There's a relationship between you and the actual object which makes you feel connected. So the temples were designed primarily for that reason.
I, I I agree. I agree totally. And we're talking about words. Like disease, dis-ease. You're not at
It's
ease.
easy your environment.
It's all in front of us. All these answers are in front of us now. I know we're getting closer to an end. I usually only run for about an hour, but I have one last question. It's going to kind of change the subject a little bit, kind of tie it into my very opening statement about Antarctica and finding civilization in Antarctica.
Oh,
We got about 10 minutes. I'd love to hear a quick synopsis because I know 10 minutes is nowhere near enough. But what is your thoughts on that one? If we go into that just a little bit.
oh, it'll be less than 10 minutes. I can tell
Oh,
you that very quickly.
okay.
There is not a scrap of evidence that there is a civilization in Antarctica. It's all opinions, which
Okay.
is fun. That's where great ideas begin. There's a bit of hearsay. There's a few conjectures. That's cool, but nothing's actually been discovered down there. I wouldn't be surprised if there was. Because and at one point, the Queen Maud land, which is the big that sticks out of Antarctica towards Argentina and Chile, that was actually 500 kilometers further north at one point. So that back about 4,000 years ago, in fact, recently, because the glaciers are melting and the ice is melting down there, they actually found that only 4,000 years ago, that part of Antarctica used to be a beautiful paradise full of rivers, fresh water, trees, fungus, and so forth. So it wouldn't surprise me because of the way things slip and move around the Earth over time, and sometimes very quickly, by the way, that there would be something down there. It would be almost anomalous if there wasn't something. In fact, given how little landmass there is left in the southern hemisphere, because most of it's now underwater, most of that stuff is underwater anyway. So, but whether there is something there, whether the Nazis went there are suggestions, hints, and smoke and mirrors. My biggest frustration with the conversations, and I talk to people about this at conferences, and they'll ask me the same question. I said, yeah, it's great to sort of shoot this around as an idea, and what if? But tell me one thing: how did the Nazis not freeze to death over the last 70 years? Because it's a bit cold down in Antarctica. I said, well, it's because of all the volcanic activity. I said, well, wouldn't the volcanic activity then melt the ice? I think we would have seen it from the air by now if there was a big molten part of Antarctica. And it's the same thing with the big pyramid that's claimed to be there. If you go to Switzerland, in southern Switzerland, there's a beautiful pyramidal mountain called the Matterhorn. And from all intents and angles, it looks like a man-made pyramid. It is not. It's a natural structure. It's the same thing in the Faroe Islands. I was struck by one day someone sent me this beautiful picture of this incredible looking pyramid. And I said, yes, it looks exactly like the pyramid on top of the Valley of the Kings, which is why they buried the kings and the queens in that valley, because you've got a natural feature that looks like a man-made pyramid, and one probably influenced the other, but they are natural places. So you see, you have to actually go there, look, do the geometry and do the homework, and go, it looks great on film, but actually in real life, it's all very natural. But does that discount the fact that there is something in Antarctica? No, it doesn't. I think we should keep looking. I think we should send people down there and then find out what they find. We were, talking about Central America, how in the middle of the jungle towards Belize and Honduras, there's nothing there. Well, there is. The biggest temple complex in the whole of the Maya world and pre-Maya world is at El Mirador, and it took until LiDAR was invented for someone to actually go, wait a minute, that is not a mountain. That's actually an actual city. So it's absolutely possible.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. And I totally agree with LiDAR. LiDAR has opened up so many new areas that we are now realizing that this actually, there was a civilization here, and there is actually mounds here. There's other things. And I think LiDAR will definitely be able to open some more doors and give us some more education or wisdom on our history and our past as well.
Yeah, and it's also going to validate what the ancients were saying all along, because they just roll their eyes when they read academia and go, well, they didn't ask us. They don't take us seriously, and we were here before them. Yeah, we know there's a big city here. We know we inherited this from something else. I mean, look at all the straight roads, the Sakbe, the royal roads throughout Yucatan. If you get down to Edzna, for example, or Itzna, as it was called, it was the place of the Itz, the house of the Itz, which are the original gods that arrived in 9600 BC. There's an actual date written in the Chilam Balam, and they arrived from a sunken island called Atoll in the middle of the Atlantic. I'll give you a clue where that is. It's called the Azores. And they've already found an underwater pyramid there as well. If you look at the roads that continue through the temple and continue going to the coast in Campeche, they go under the Gulf of Mexico. It's basic mathematics. Find out when that part of the Gulf of Mexico was above sea level. It was over 7,000 years ago. So, ergo, the road has to be older than that. And the locals just said, well, the roads are already here. Someone built them. We just fixed the potholes, and nothing's been improved since then. We got the same thing in Britain with the so-called Roman roads. That the Romans said we didn't build them. The reason why we invaded Europe so quickly is because these straight roads cover the whole of Europe. They go from cult center to cult center, and that's how we got around. We just fixed the potholes. And they happen in Ireland. The Romans were never in Ireland, and they're all over Persia. And the Romans were never in Persia either. So you see, again, the vestiges are all there. You just have to listen to what the ancients were saying. And I, for one, think they're absolutely right on.
I agree. There is and at Edzna there is the House of the Atlantean. There
Yeah.
is it's named the House of the Atlantean. And I was like, yeah, and I've heard this before as well, that Maya, like the Mayan culture, was not founded but was helped, or helped pushed along by the Adals, and that is
Oh,
actually
absolutely.
by a book. I don't know if you Visions of Atlantis by Michael Laflemme. He did an excellent job of researching and going into this. It is fantastic.
Oh, it's
He
great. And if you want to find out about the Maya, you've got to inquire about the Itz. And I spent years with a great teacher called Miguel Angel Vergara, who knows more about the Maya than anybody else down there. And I said, you have to understand the Itz and where they come from, because that's the foundation of Maya. There is actually no such thing as Maya people. It's a spiritual tradition. You're not born Maya, you become Maya. You aspire to become Maya. It's like Maori is a spiritual tradition, not people. And it was said that when the Itz arrived in Yucatan, they call it Mayab, which has been the land of the few, of the water people. So these are the survivors that arrived in that part of the world. Now they've now found Maya artifacts in caves along Tulum, which were drowned in 8,000 BC. Therefore, the Maya cannot be 5,000 years old. That is its claim. If the artifacts were now underwater by 8,000 BC, and the archaeologists said they're Maya artifacts. There are skeletons. There are sloths, mammoths, and things that died at the end of the Ice Age, and here they are now underwater in these caves. Well, yeah, because back then they weren't called Maya; they were called something else, and they came from somewhere else. And now we have this, giant, 8 foot tall giant with the red hair in a place not far from Chichen Itza. And I'll tell you, also, there is one place where you can go. When you come into Chichen Itza from the west, there's a church in the beginning of town. There's a giant buried there, and he's about 8 feet tall, and he's got red hair too. Not that the priest will admit it, but we know it's there because people that work in archaeology that were Maya, they actually recorded this.
Okay, there's so many places in my backyard here that I got to get out to and
Oh, you
go
have to.
visit. Well, of course, I've been to Chichen Itza. I think everybody has, but I've been to a lot of places that are less traveled here, and I
Go
think
to
there's,
Itzamal.
yeah, it's a map.
Itzamal is the key to everything, and nobody goes there. And I hope I haven't destroyed this illusion because I love going there. The biggest pyramid in the whole of the region is up there, and hardly anybody goes up there. And they used the stones to build much of the town, and there's still 2/3 of the building left, and there's 7 pyramids altogether. One of them's behind a burger joint. I mean, it's incredible. So if you want to learn about the Maya and the Central American civilization, Itzamal is where the um, ground zero is for that part of the world.
And I'm like, that name rings a bell. I've been to Itzamal as well. I have not been to the archaeological site. I've been to the city of Itzamal. Bought my car there, so
Yeah.
it's
The sites are the city. The city is built out of the actual site. So you walk past these hills and you go, "Oh, that's actually a pyramid," and and there's a lovely restaurant next to it. So you've got to be very observant. And the main cathedral there, which is grossly out of proportion
is
to the whole
huge.
town,
It
is the
is
most
massive.
important bishopric in the whole of Christendom outside of Rome. In Etzamal in Central America. Well, why? Look at the alignment. This is part of my research now because the Catholic Church had to build its churches east-west. Okay, you have to stick to that plan because it's about Christ's crucifixion, which is absolute nonsense. The problem is when you have to hide the temple that's there, the temple is not aligned to east-west; it's aligned to something else. And in this case, if you go to the top of the main cathedral there, it's not aligned east-west; it's aligned to about 126 degrees southeast. Which, if you do the calculation, basic calculation, it's the sunrise on the winter solstice in 9,600 BC, which is the exact date of arrival of Itzamna, the god, along with Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan. That's why it's so important. You see, it's right under your very nose.
It's right there. Yeah, and that cathedral of sorts is massive, and it is. If anybody ever goes there, you can't miss it. It is,
Yeah,
and
out
it's
of
up high.
proportion.
It's elevate. Yes, and it's elevated as well. So yeah, and that was something that they did a lot with the Spaniards. Is they would build on top of the pyramids. They would take the pyramids, kind of like
Yeah.
desecrate them, and build on top to be. It's the same concept of putting your name on the temple and being like, this is mine now. This is mine now.
Exactly. I mean,
It, it,
they took the idea from Europe where they came. They were doing the same thing throughout Europe. So pretty much anything built up to the 13th century in Europe is built on an old sacred site, with almost without exception. So they took the same concept, but it's just the fact the whole thing is so out of proportion. And that's one of the main pyramids also in the center of Itzamal is what's underneath the cathedral. So you've got to keep asking questions. And I mean, I actually did a whole documentary, which I'm very proud of, called The Mystery of the Maya. I put all of this information in there. I've never published it. It's good enough for a documentary, but not flushed out yet for a whole book. And I was a bit impatient, but it's all there if you want to sort of read and watch it about it, because it will open up your whole interest of the Yucatan as being a very, very important part of the world.
it really is. It really is. I think it gets overlooked. I think it gets overshadowed by like the Egyptian. The Egyptians. Everybody's so focused on the Egyptian pyramids and Egypt, but I'm like, there's so much more here. Like, and the
Yeah.
amount that has been uncovered here is just a fraction, just a sliver of what there really is here.
Oh, totally.
It's
And there's a lot of
so.
overlap with Egyptian culture. I mean, if you go to Uxmal, there's an image of an Egyptian priest with his ceremonial headdress at Uxmal. And in Karnak in Egypt, there's a visiting priest from Yucatan with the
Yep.
ceremonial headdress. The
Yes.
word Maya, that's an Egyptian word for water, and Maya means water. The water people, I think Balcourt, crevice, There's a whole bunch of words in the Maya language which are actually Egyptian and vice versa. So, and the gods that were in the Maya world, they were the nicknames the people of the serpent, the Kanul. Well, that was the nickname of the followers of Horus in Egypt as well, and also the Anunnaki in Armenia and also in Sumeria. So they're all connected. All of these things are connected there, and they also share the same flood information as well. So yeah, no, it's astonishing. This is why I quit my day job and ended up doing this for the last 30 years, and I don't regret it.
I would not either, Freddie. I want to say thank you so much for this. Like the amount of an hour just doesn't even scratch the surface, but I appreciate your time immensely because you are a man of knowledge and wisdom, and you're going further than most, and I applaud that, and I want to say thank you so much for coming out.
Thanks, Roy. I appreciate being on here.
Thank you so much. All right, everyone. That was Freddy Silva with a wealth of knowledge that we've done a drop. He's given us a drop of his knowledge, and his collection. I will say his collection of knowledge and wisdom. That's what he's doing. He's collecting all these stories and bringing them back. And we have to sit there and say, like what we're being told is the truth and is the past isn't. There's so many contradictions that it's fantastic that we actually have someone who's able to prove that these contradictions are false. So I want to applaud that. I want to say thank you because it's amazing. Okay. So, the question now is like, what do we do with this knowledge that we are given? Are we doomed to repeat these cycles over and over again? It very much could be, because of everything that it can happen. And we need to learn from this wisdom, and maybe they're trying to erase it so that when the time comes we just succumb to it all. I don't know. So again, huge thank you to Freddie for sharing his insights and challenging us to see beyond the veil of accepted history. So, and thank you to the listeners for being a part of this journey. And if you enjoyed this, make sure you subscribe, leave a review, share it with your fellow seekers of the unknown. And if you want to dive deeper, check out my Patreon, my merch store as well, so I can continue to keep doing this. And until next time, everyone, keep your curiosity wandering, keep the light lit, and always find your way home.
Beneath the stars where shadows grow, the Nephilim's echoes whisper low. Bigfoot roams through the forest deep, and Dogman prowls where the brave won't sleep. Across lost history we wonder why, seeking the truth that time tried to hide. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the Codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. UFOs streak through the velvet skies, aliens watch with unblinking eyes. The paranormal hums where silence breaks, in the void of secrets a lantern wakes. Through hidden realms and stories untold, the Codex flame is a light to hold. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the Codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. UFOs streak through the velvet skies, aliens watch with unblinking eyes. The paranormal hums where silence breaks, in the void of secrets a lantern wakes. Through hidden realms and stories untold, the Codex flame is a light to hold. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the Codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. Legends rise from the Earth's deep core, a lost legend strange begins. Keeping curiosities wandering in the light lit. Through the darkness, don't ever quit. In the Codex, the mysteries come and always find your way back home. Giants, cryptids that call